Civilizations don't collapse overnight. They collapse slowly and then suddenly. One moment, people are prospering, and then the next, they're wondering how it all fell apart. The real question is not why do cultures collapse? The real question is what do individuals do when collapse is starting and they still have a chance to stop it? Today, I want to explore that question through two texts that carry universal lessons. One is the story Parshat Pinchas in the Torah, and also the liturgy of the 17th of Tammuz, because the time of this year on Parshat Pinchas is being given on the day of the 17th of Tammuz, which is a day of mourning, really for moral and cultural failure, as we'll see. There were 5 specific events that happened on this day in history. We'll go over that. But together, they offer a blueprint for how to face cultural chaos, not as victims, but as moral actors. I'll give you the background. At the end of Parshat Balak, the Israelites fall into moral collapse. They're seduced by the Moabite women, and they begin worshiping Baal Peor, which is a form of idolatry that mixes religious ritual with degradation. As the verse states in Numbers chapter 25, verse 3, and Israel joined to Baal Peor, and the anger of God was kindled. One of Israel's leaders, the head of the tribe of Shimon, called Zimri, publicly flaunts this new normal. He brings a Midianite woman into the camp in front of everyone, including Moses. And no one knows what to do. It's outrageous. And a plague starts. People die. Like 24,000 souls are lost, as we see at the end of the previous Parshat Balak. But at that moment, one man steps forward, Pinchas. He takes decisive action. He halts the sin, and the plague stops. How he does it is pretty graphic. He does it by taking his spear. He runs it through Zimri and the Midianite woman Cosbi. And the Torah says, behold, I give him my covenant of peace. How often do you get peace from this kind of action? That, by the way, is in chapter 25, verse 12. And it shall be for him and his descendants a covenant of eternal priesthood. He was the grandson of Aaron, but as we know, only Aaron and his 4 sons were to be the Kohanim, the priests. I mean to say, only their descendants, not the grandchildren of Aaron. But because of this act of zealousness, Hashem extended the identity of the priesthood of the Kehuna to Pinchas and his children. That's in verse 13. Let's step back for a second. This was not the first time a leader had to make a difficult choice during moral collapse. We see earlier, on the 17th of Tammuz, Moses came down from Sinai with the Luchot, the tablets of the covenant. He saw the golden calf, he saw the debauchery, he saw the idolatry. What did he do? Says the verse in Exodus chapter 32, verse 19, he shattered the tablets at the foot of the mountain. Now, is that what you would do with these tablets, these spiritual items, these miraculous tablets that had the writing of Hashem on them? And as we see in the Medrash, that the letters ran all the way through from one side to the other, which meant that certain letters like Mem, Samech, which are round, and the only way you can tell them, you know, is to see the middle part, and that this was miraculously floating in the. I mean, the thing ran from one side to the other. It was given directly by God. Is this what you would do? And yet, the last verse in the Torah speaks of the greatness that Moses performed in the eyes of all Israel. And the commentary on that is that that's the act of shattering the tablets. This was considered his greatest act. Because sometimes breaking something precious preserves something more important. If Moses had handed over the luchot, the tablets, to a people that were worshiping idols, the covenant would have been destroyed spiritually, not just physically. This is what philosophers call tragic choice with moral clarity. It's not about destruction for the sake of destruction. It's about decisive intervention to prevent irreversible collapse. Now, why do cultures collapse? Cultures collapse when they normalize immorality, when public sin becomes public policy, when sacred boundaries dissolve. It's not just ancient history. In every generation, we face moral unraveling, when truth becomes negotiable, when transgression is celebrated as progress, and when silence is mistaken for peace. So, what do Pinchas and Moses have in common? They both acted when no one else would. They weren't chasing power, they weren't looking for status. They were preserving the moral order at the cost of their own comfort. And this is what the philosopher Philip Reef called the defense of sacred order, and what Stephen Hicks describes as moral clarity over cynicism. By the way, as I'm dropping these names, you should look them up because it's good for your brain. Now, you might ask, as B'nai Noach, I'm not part of Israel's priesthood, so what does this have to do with me? And as usual, the answer is everything. Because the 7 Noahide laws are about preserving universal ethics. No murder, no theft, no idolatry, no cruelty to animals, no blasphemy, no adultery, establishing just courts. These aren't tribal laws. They are the moral infrastructure of civilization. When these break down, societies don't survive. So this is the importance of it. We see in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, page 59a, says the following thing. Let me back up a second. When we come back to the events of the 17th of Tammuz, we know that one of the tragedies of that day was that the walls of Jerusalem were breached by the Babylonian troops, And this starts a 3-week process that culminated ultimately in the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple. So there is a problem vis-a-vis the 7 Noahide laws in the sense of justice is not carried out, meaning to say that there is a tremendous injustice that happens. And that is the conquering of the land of Israel by a foreign army, which really places us in the problem of theft. We see in the Gemara that Gentiles are not b'nei kibush, meaning to say the word kibush means conquest. They're not tasked with conquest. The nations of this world have borders, and they're supposed to remain within those borders as long as they don't have to defend themselves, as long as they don't have to take territory in defense. The nation of Israel, by contrast, has a specific divine command to conquer the land of Israel, but nations do not. Now, the Gemara is explaining this with regard to something that we've talked about many times, which is what does it mean? What are the implications of the 7 laws being repeated at Mount Sinai? Right? Does it still apply? What still applies? What does not apply any longer? And in the process of that conversation, we have the phrase "late midam de Israel Shari." In the context of that discussion, the idea that there is nothing that is permitted to the Jewish people that is forbidden to the Bnei Noach comes up. And then we have an interesting case where it seems that there is something, which is the Ifat Toar. We will see that later in Deuteronomy. The idea of the war bride, which is permitted to conquering troops of Israel and is not permitted to anybody else. And the Gemara explains that the principle that there is nothing that is forbidden to Bnei Noach that is permitted to Israel, to the Bnei Israel. The reason why we have an exception in this case is because Bnei Noach are not Bnei Kibush. They are not people who are supposed to conquer other territories. And Rashi explains that even though there's one nation that has the ability, not just the ability to do this, but the obligation to do so, because the land of Israel needed to be conquered from the Canaanite nations. Even though that was true, Israel's conquest is limited only to the territory that Hashem assigns to them. And that's important because it corrects a certain historical error. You see, empires like Babylon and Rome and later colonial expansions claimed moral legitimacy for conquest, but the Torah says that was never their role. The Bnei Noach are tasked with building, not conquering. Their mission is stewardship, not domination. Leadership and not imperialism. Now, we know that God says to Adam at the beginning of time that you're supposed to have dominion over the earth. That's also true for everybody. That's true for all of humanity. Humanity is supposed to have dominion over the earth. But dominion over the earth suggests responsibility for it, suggests stewardship over it. So it's not to say, when we say that Bnei Noach are not Bnei Kibush, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't They shouldn't hold public office. They shouldn't be leaders. Of course they should. We need good leadership in this world. We need moral people to be at the helms of power in this world. That would be a perfected world. But why did Pinchas receive a covenant of eternal priesthood? Meaning, if Aaron and his four sons were supposed to be the Kohanim, were supposed to be the priests, how does all of a sudden this identity extend? And the answer is because his act was about more than just stopping a plague. It was about preserving the spiritual integrity that would one day center around the Beit HaMikdash, around the temple. And the temple is not just for Israel. This verse always comes up in our conversations, but it needs to. It also came up in the liturgy today, on the 17th of Tammuz. The prophet Isaiah says, chapter 56, verse 7, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations." And we see in Zechariah, chapter 14, verse 16, and the whole section over there, that eventually all the nations will go up to Jerusalem for Sukkot to serve Hashem there. This is not fantasy. It's a universal vision of moral unity through sacred order. That temple, this period of time that begins on the 17th of Tammuz, it's called Ben HaMitzarim, between the straits, and it ends on Tisha B'Av, 3 weeks from now, is something that B'nai Noach have to have in their consciousness, because the temple is something that represents all the spiritual sustenance that comes into the world to nourish the whole world. Even when the temple stood, the Jewish people maintained synagogues and study halls. They're not replacements for the temple. They're parallel institutions. Chazal referred to the synagogue as a mikdash me'at, a small sanctuary. It's like a miniature Beit HaMikdash. Not that it's a replacement, but it's supposed to remind us of the centrality of the Beit HaMikdash. Today, the synagogue is a place of prayer, learning, moral refinement for Jews, and where possible, and for Noahides seeking spiritual growth. It reminds us of the future temple, but it also serves as a current moral anchor. So if you live in a place where it is possible to do, it would be a good thing to go visit a synagogue and to pray there. What's the lesson from all of this? When cultures collapse, you have two options. You could watch and mourn. That's the bulk of the news and the media today. Or you can act and repair. Pinchas acted. Moses acted. Are we going to act? Let me leave you with this. When sacred order is breaking, doing nothing is also a choice. Standing for truth will cost you something, but not standing for truth will cost you everything. The courage to act isn't fanaticism. It's responsibility. When that Pinchas moment comes, don't hesitate. Act. And may we all have the clarity to know exactly what to do and when.